This is the Thoughtful Travel Podcast. I'm your host, Amanda Kendall of the notaballerina.com travel blog. Every episode I'll share travel tales from several fellow travel lovers, and together we hope to entertain and inspire you, remind you of some of your own great travel experiences, and encourage you to hit the road again soon. Hello and welcome to episode 131 of the Thoughtful Travel Podcast. Today's topic is all about why you should take your children travelling. I feel really strongly about this and I always remember when I was living in Germany, I met a man and he had a keen interest in travelling, and he also had 2 or maybe 3 kids who I think at that stage were sort of ranging in age between, 7 and 12, 8 and 13 years of age, something like that. And even though I was, in my 20s at the time, no kids and not married or anything, but I was really struck by the fact that he kept going with his wife to these amazing parts of the world. I remember he was the first person I'd ever met who'd been to Oman and been on safari out in the desert there and all these other cool trips. But he didn't ever take his children. They always left them at home. They weren't babies. They weren't adults who'd left. They were, to me, like kids who would probably like the trip. And it always struck me, and I've always wondered what his reason was, and I never had the chance to find out. But there's lots of people who don't necessarily think that you should take your children travelling, but I am a very firm 100% advocate of it, as are my 3 guests today. And I am absolutely sure that my son, who's very nearly 9, has been shaped, and his whole personality has been moulded by some of the trips that we've taken and the experiences he's had while we've been travelling, and all for the better, I'm sure. So anyway, that's just to preface this by saying I have a very strong viewpoint that you should take your children travelling, and I guess my guests all do too, but we've got lots and lots and lots of reasons. So if you don't yet share my viewpoint, maybe I'll persuade you. Before we get to my first guest, I need to say a huge thank you to the Scrubber wash bag people who are our sponsors this month. Scrubber make a bunch of different products, all connected to making your travel easier, and my favourite is their Scrubber wash bag, which makes hand washing clothes as you travel a billion times easier. It's not hand washing anymore, it's in this magical bag. If you look through the show notes or go to thescrubber.com, you can see some of these products. They have a really cool one, which is actually what I initially had a few years back and still have, but it was my initial introduction to them was the wash and dry kit. It has their wash bag, a travel towel, inflatable hangers, washing line, all in this kind of very small and neat pack. It's very cool. And since we're talking about traveling with children, I think it'd be especially useful if you're taking young kids with you who tend to make lots of stuff dirty very quickly. I'm kind of glad my son passed that age and he can usually keep his t-shirt clean through a whole meal even. So it does make life easier. Anyway, if you are looking at thescrubber.com, you can use the discount code Amanda15 and get a 15% discount. Now, on to why you should take your children travelling. And my first guest today is Talon Windwalker, who took his daughter travelling, I think, for about 6 years, if I remember the term rightly, like full-time, long-term travel. So he clearly thinks that you should take your children travelling, and here are some of his reasons.
One of the things, I've been, working in healthcare for a long time, and I've worked in intensive care and trauma and have been doing hospice since the early 2000s. And I just have really come up with having my own personal and family motto of live without regrets. And so one thing the reason we did long-term traveling for almost 6 years. And one reason I did that is as I was traveling and I saw some families traveling with kids, I thought, what a great opportunity for kids to get to experience other cultures and see things through, you see the world from such a different viewpoint when you're a child compared to an adult. And so those were some of the reasons why. And also, I just noticed when I was traveling to other countries, especially when I went to the Philippines, I saw the sense of community and a sense of, of what's truly valuable to people. And I thought, this is really, I remember one day I was watching, there were some kids that were playing with a grocery plastic bag. They tied some string on it and they were flying it as a kite, and they were having the time of their life, giggling and laughing and having a great time running around, and adults were laughing watching them. And I thought, that's really what I would like my child to grow up feeling that way, instead of the massive commercialism that we have in the U.S. and that kind of, possession culture that we have here. So that was one of the big reasons why I wanted to do that. So I'm a single parent.
Yeah, keep going. I was just going to say that's such a good reason. It reminds me, just yesterday my son and I were out in our backyard playing soccer, and our backyard's a little bit weedy and bumpy because I'm not a great gardener. But we didn't complain because we remembered a couple of months ago we were in Cambodia and we played soccer with the kids there, and their soccer pitch was considerably worse than ours, and they were still having an awesome time. And I think that you're dead right to be able to see you can have fun no matter what. You don't have to have a whole lot of all the latest Xbox or PlayStation, all this other stuff. I think that's a really fabulous lesson for kids to learn when they travel.
Yeah, one of the things that really hit me, we've been traveling, I think, for 2 or 3 years at this point, and we were getting close to, we celebrate our own holiday called Christmaka, which is a combination of winter holidays. We don't just do one.
I remember reading about it on your blog. I love it.
Yeah. So as we were getting close to Christmaka and we were traveling, I had asked my daughter for her wish list for Christmaka, and she really struggled. Before in the U.S., it was constantly, I want this, I want this, I want that. But in traveling, it was very different. And part of it, I'm sure, is, the lack of possessions, because basically the rule is whatever can fit in your backpack or your suitcase, you're good to go,
Yeah.
So, but she really struggled. And, after a few days, she just said, I'm having such a hard time thinking of anything. And she said that, when you've seen people living in sheet metal homes and they're still joyful, you really find you don't need much. And I thought, amazing. Perfect. Exactly.
Yeah. That is brilliant. You did a good job there by taking her to all of those places that, taught her such a great lesson. That's incredible. 6 years is a really long time to travel. What age was she as you travelled for all that time long term?
So when we left, she was getting close to turning 10.
Right. Okay. So through a lot of the teen years, that's a really very impressionable, important time to be seeing different things around the world.
Yeah, and that was one of the reasons, too, I wanted to leave when she was about 9, because I felt like, while you can certainly travel with younger children and they remember stuff, I felt like 9 is really a great age, 9 and 10, because they're still young enough where everything is magical and everything interests them, but they're more independent. They can do a little bit more on their own. They can handle, being out and about longer and carry their own bags, stuff like that. So I felt like it was kind of a good combination. And so that was one of the things that pushed me to kind of do it a little sooner rather than later.
Yeah, I think I agree. My son's 8 now, and I'm a single parent, so travel with him alone, and I have done for many years, but just in the last year or two, as he's sort of 7, 8, nearly 9, it's a fabulous age for a lot of those reasons. Much more independent, much more kind of able to stay up late if we need, and he carries all his own bags, sometimes mine as well, and it's kind of like traveling with a little adult. But but without the teen angst that can come later on, like they still think mum or dad is pretty cool.
Yeah. And it's like I said, it's such a fun age because they're still excited about things, but also you can communicate at a little deeper level. I realize, some younger children can as well, but typically for most kids, around 8 or 9, they're able to really communicate a lot more. And it's such a fascinating experience to be out in the world, experiencing these different cultures and different environments and situations. and having their perspective and getting to see through their eyes. It's just phenomenal to be able to have that experience and kind of hear her comments. And there are times that, as the adult, I was frustrated with, inefficiency or how things didn't work out right and plans didn't work out right and companies weren't providing, the customer service I wish they were, and, the typical little adult things. And, your child is just, they're having fun doing whatever. I remember we were on this horrible bus ride from Guatemala to Honduras, and I was just miserable. It was not comfortable, and it was super long. It was supposed to be a lot shorter, than it was, and I was just not having a good time. And, she was going underneath seats and moving around and making games, and it was helpful to me to see, okay, it's really just perspective, make it work.
I do think that Talon's theory about around age 9 being a pretty magical age to travel with kids is true. It's certainly been my favourite times with my son lately, and I'm really looking forward to our trip to Europe later this year. Now, my next guest today is Megan Blandford. She's a fellow Aussie, and I've known her quite a few years through blogging. She used to run a travel blog, and now she's a freelance writer full-time, and she still loves to travel a lot. And she and her husband like to take their 2 daughters travelling a lot as well.
There's a few reasons that we travel with our kids, and the first has nothing to do with them at all. The first is just that my husband and I love to travel, and that was what when we first met, we really connected over travel and talking about all these places we wanted to go and where we'd been. And so we love to travel, and so we just happened to take the kids with us. But
that's a very good reason. They're just kind of there, so they come too. Perfect.
Yeah, that's it. So we don't necessarily do it for them, but they get a lot out of it. They're very lucky. So I guess what they get out of it is, we all talk about this educational side to travel for kids, and we kind of use it as an excuse, I guess, to say, oh, well, it's educational, so it's good for them. But I think beyond the traditional idea of education, so, if we think it's educational for kids, we tend to think it's, we're getting these specific cultural experiences, or we're going to these museums, or, we tend to put it into very specific ideas.
Like a subject at school, and it will help their history or geography or something, or
yeah, we do. And so especially when we're taking them out of school to travel, we tend to think, oh, well, it needs to be educational. But I tend to think that it's just generally educational for them, whether it's, it's family time and we're spending time together and we're going to somewhere different. And even if that's to lie on a beach, that's okay. There's still something they will get out of that will enhance their lives, at least in the short term and maybe in the long term as well. So I tend to think of this educational idea as a bit broader. They always get something out of it, and whether it's taking them somewhere, country Germany, where they go, oh, not everyone speaks our language.
Yes,
or
exactly.
whether it's taking them to Sri Lanka, where they see, we went there and the kids saw all sorts of things and were exposed to all different foods, and so different from where we live. And I think, we live in a country town, so we're fairly sheltered. Our kids are being raised in a fairly sheltered environment. It's fairly safe. The people who are around them are, quite similar to them. So for me, it's really important to say, hey, there's this whole world out here. And the other thing that does is not just educate them, but it also takes their problems that they've got in their own little bubble and gets them out of that and puts it in perspective. It does that for us as well, but it even does that for the kids. So when, they've got something going on at school, for example, that's and that stuff is huge. If it's a friendship problem or they're being bullied or something is going on there, that's their whole world.
Mm.
And so you get them out of that and take them to this whole other place, and it puts things in perspective, and it helps them overcome some of that stuff by just saying, oh, okay, that's not everything. Do you know what I mean?
Absolutely. Yeah. I think that broader perspective and from the very kind of obvious of seeing, like if they see kids who, live in much more difficult circumstances than themselves, but even just that, there's all kinds of people in the world doing all kinds of things, and reminding them that, the school playground is not where they have to be forever, because, like you're right, when you're having those kind of friendship things or something like that as a young kid, that can feel like it's everything, but just knowing that there's so many other things out there, I think that helps. I mean, my son and I often half joke at the beginning of the school year. We always think, well, what if he ends up with a teacher who, because for him, he's, he really wants to be well behaved and he wants to be a good kid in class. And, I always say, well, one time you might have a teacher who you just don't gel with, or they might tell you off or whatever. And we always have this joke, well, if that happens, we'll just go and travel a lot that year. It's okay, because traveling solves all of these things. And it's not just in a running away kind of sense, but in the, you can just, that there's all this other stuff out there. This is not the only thing in life.
Yeah, and there's options. There's things in your future. There's things to look forward to that are way outside of this little bubble.
Exactly.
That you're living in for most of the year.
Yeah.
It's really important to us. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, no, I agree. I think that you're dead right. And I do the same myself, is I often think of the traditionally educational benefits of it, because I'm trying to justify why he's missing school.
Yeah.
But really what he really learns more of is real life skills, and I've seen his personality be molded by some of the travel experiences we've had. I know that, and the kind of the quantity and variety of experiences you have when you're traveling just is so much more than what you can really ever have at home. So, like you say, we live in suburban Perth. It's pretty sheltered. Everyone's pretty the same. So, like you said, so to be able to get away from that and see all these other things, it's so valuable.
Yeah. And those life skills, like you mentioned, there are so many things they get from traveling, and it's similar to what we get out of it in some ways. So especially as they get older, we're now involving the kids in the planning, or, when we're there getting around. Okay, yes. How are we going to navigate this? What are we going to do first? How do we fit in things that each of us want to do? So that, there's a lot of problem solving in that they're involved with. Yeah. There's that consideration and cooperation of, hey, there's four of us, and there's things that you're going to want to do that we don't want to do. There's things that I'm going to want to do that you won't want to do, but it will all work out over the course of the trip.
Yes.
That we've all got something in, and we'll have done things as well that we've all really loved. So, there's those real life skills.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's just a couple of examples.
Megan's so right that along with the kind of traditional educational side of travel, all the rest of it, I guess the soft skills and the life skills are so, so valuable. And it's just stuff you can't necessarily learn in a classroom, or that you learn, much quicker and more deeply while you're traveling. So just a few more reasons why I think you should travel with your children. Now, my final guest today is Shannon Enton, who has now a teenager and an adult child, but over the years has done lots and lots and lots of travelling with her kids. And I asked Shannon why she thought you should travel with your children.
I just think that it's obvious. It's obvious to me anyway. It opens up the world to children, and we haven't traveled internationally that much, but even in your own country, there was a recent Facebook group. It's called Traveling with Teens. And one of the questions in the group was, what was your teen's favorite place they visited? And when I asked my daughter, I have a 14-year-old daughter, I have a 20-year-old son. Mm-hmm. So we've been doing this for a very long time. And I asked my daughter what her favorite place was that we ever went. And she's like, I can't even remember all the places we went, and she's very lucky, yes. And she actually wanted me to sit down with her and make a list. I had to go back into like my photo files and my hard drives, and she wanted to make a list of everywhere we went. And it was interesting because the places that she picked out, I would have thought, Disney World, Greece, the biggies, but she picked out the smaller trips. Like she said that we spent one day in Austin, Texas. It rained, we shopped, we drove around, we did like this quick tour of we kind of tried to cram everything in. We saw the murals and we had tacos and we went to this crazy like costume store. And for some reason that day, like stuck in her head, it was just her and I, and it's interesting, the things that I think really stick with kids. Sometimes it's not the big trips to Disney. It's the, smaller, quirkier types of things. They really, they really loved. We again spent, we do a lot of road trips. So we spent literally a couple hours at Mount Rushmore. And, my kids were just like, that was so cool. They loved that. They loved seeing it. They thought it was just absolutely fascinating. And all we did was like walk around a little, take a quick hike. And, we saw mountain goats and cool animals up on the hills. And those little things, I think, make just, they expose kids to so much more than they get if they're not traveling.
Yeah.
And, all those special experiences they remember.
Yeah, it's so right. And I know whenever I ask my son about some of his favourite travel moments, I'm always surprised at the ones that he picks. And we had a couple of weeks in Cambodia and Vietnam with a tour group with Hands on Journeys last year. And we had a day where he was quite distressed. We went in to work on a project in a really, a village outside of Phnom Penh that was very, really struggling. It was, it was like a lot of poverty and stuff. And he, at first he didn't want to get out of the bus and it was awful. And, he was, really struggling with this whole idea of it. Anyway, so we got him through that and, we ended up kind of doing half of that and then going back to the hotel for a while. And so like 10 days later, the end of our whole trip, and I said to him, so what was your favourite part of the whole trip? And, we'd done all kinds of incredible things and he'd really loved Angkor Wat and I thought that would be one, or, even like, hotel pools. We'd had, that I thought that would be high up. But no, then he says to me, oh no, my favourite day was that day in the village. And I'm like, oh my gosh. I couldn't believe it.
That's amazing.
Yeah. And he had lots of good reasons for it and it all made sense. But you just never know what they're thinking and they just don't think the same as we do.
Exactly. Yeah. And I homeschool my kids. So we do get a lot of opportunity to, school on the road. That's always been a very important thing for me is when wherever we go, I try to fit some kind of education in there. My husband is really big on history, so he'll always find out what happened in a place and we'll do all the historical tours. And surprisingly, my kids like those. A lot of kids find them boring, but we've tried really hard to kind of bring history to life for them. I think that's another really important reason to travel with your kids so they can see, exactly. We did this fantastic tour. It was done with an iPad in Gettysburg.
Oh,
and
wow.
it was virtual reality. So we stood in the spot where Abraham Lincoln gave the Gettysburg Address, and you hold the iPad in front of you, and it matches up with what you're seeing in real life, and you see everything happening. It was just it was incredible. So there's
awesome.
Some really cool things out there. Yeah.
Yeah, gosh,
Very
isn't technology
cool.
amazing? I've visited Gettysburg with my step aunt and uncle some years back, quite a few years back, and they drove us around and they had I don't know if it was a CD or even a cassette, but they had a cassette or CD in the car that was like our guided tour of it, which I thought was amazing enough, but I'm just envisaging the modern day version with the iPad and cassette. That's incredible. I mean, even for adults it's awesome, but obviously for kids that really, really sets the scene and puts them in that place. That's amazing. From that early part of my conversation with Shannon, the idea that kids so often surprise us with what they remember and what they thought was the highlight of their trip just continues to astound me. I'm always amazed what my son remembers from trips 4 or 5 years ago when he was only 3 or 4 years old, and he distinctly remembers things that are true and happened, but not something that I've mentioned to him in recent years, and he still remembers. So, and it's never what you expect him to remember, but I love that about it. So hopefully I have reminded you of some of the excellent reasons we should travel with our children. And if you're not convinced, just ask me any questions. I will continue to convince you. Thank you very much for listening to episode 131 of the Thoughtful Travel podcast. Don't forget our fabulous sponsor this month is Scrubber and their Scrubber wash bag. You can use the discount code Amanda15 for a 15% discount off any Scrubber product, and you can find all their stuff at thescrubber.com. That's the Scrubber, SCRUBBA.com. Awesome stuff. Thanks so much to all my fabulous guests today. I started off speaking to Talon Windwalker, and you can find him at onedad1kid.com. The ones are numbers. Thank you also to Megan Blandford. You can find her at meganblandford.net, and her book I'm Fine and Other Lies about postnatal depression and motherhood is coming out in April. I've pre-ordered my copy, Megan, so I'm looking forward to it coming soonish. And last but definitely not least, a big thank you to Shannon Enton of thetvtraveller.com. I've got some interesting stuff coming up from Shannon about travelling to find your scenes and sets from your favourite TV and movies. So we'll get to that episode in the next weeks or a couple of months maybe. All of this info is in the show notes, and you can find the show notes for this episode at notaballerina.com/131. And of course, please come over to our Facebook group. We are, well, maybe by the time this episode goes out, we will have hit 500 members. We are perilously close to 500 members. So do come and join us and join in some of the awesome chats. You can find us just by searching for Thoughtful Travellers on Facebook or through a link in the show notes. Thanks again so very much for listening. This has been another episode of the Thoughtful Travel podcast. Show notes and other information are at notaballerina.com/podcast. Join me again soon for another chat about why we travel. Bye for now.